Cabanatuan Prison Camp No. 1, December 1944. Before dawn, the camp stirred like an exhausted animal. The rattle of tin mess kits, the cough of men whose lungs had forgotten what clean air felt like, the barked orders of guards echoing through the rows of nipa huts, it was the rhythm of survival. Beneath a haze of mosquitoes and fear, over 500 Americans woke to another day behind the barbed wire of Cabanatuan. They rose slowly, bones showing through uniforms that had become colorless rags. Some had no shirts, only strips of canvas tied around their waists. Their eyes were sunken and cautious. They moved not with the pride of soldiers but with the reflexes of ghosts. To speak too loudly invited attention, to draw attention invited pain. Captain Robert Swanson, who had once commanded an engineering company on Bataan, stared across the yard at the Japanese guard tower. He had counted the same 7 guards every morning for 3 weeks, never daring to hope the number might change. The tower riflemen had names among the prisoners: Bayonet Charlie, Sleepy, the Thin Man. Their faces were as much a part of the camp's geography as the rusted water tank or the pit latrines that steamed in the dawn. Breakfast was a ladle of rice gruel, boiled water with a few grains floating like ash. The camp doctor, a gaunt Navy surgeon named Light Doc Dunlop, joked bitterly that it was rice-flavored rain. Those who could still stand shuffled to the fence line to eat. Those who could not, stayed in their bunks, staring at the holes in the palm thatch roof where the sun would soon burn through. Disease ruled everything. Beriberi swelled the limbs of the weak, dysentery claimed the careless. Dunlop did what he could with salvaged quinine and imagination. He sterilized instruments with firewood, stitched wounds with fishing line, and rationed sulfa powder as if it were gold dust. Still, men died daily, quietly, without ceremony. At roll call, their names were shouted, answered by silence, and crossed off the list with a soft pencil stroke. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. By late morning, the Japanese guards herded work details toward the fields. The men moved barefoot along the dirt road, their shadows thin and trembling. Beyond the camp fence lay open plains dotted with carabao and sugar cane, a world tantalizingly close, yet unreachable. A few prisoners whispered rumors of American landings far to the south. Others said it was wishful thinking. The Japanese propaganda loudspeakers still declared victory after victory. No one believed it, but no one dared to say so aloud. One prisoner, Lieutenant John Evans of the 26th Cavalry, kept a secret record of the camp's routines, scratched into the inside of a mess tin with a nail. He noted guard changes, supply deliveries, even the phases of the moon. He told himself it was preparation for escape, though deep down he knew escape was impossible. It was simply a way to keep from going mad. That afternoon, a Japanese truck rolled in through the main gate. Prisoners stopped working for a moment as officers climbed down. Among them was Captain Sasaki, the camp commandant, thin, efficient, and indifferent. He conferred briefly with a sergeant, gestured toward the infirmary, then departed. Within the hour, 3 prisoners were taken for questioning. None returned. As night fell, the camp sank into uneasy quiet. From the far huts came the weak strains of a harmonica, playing home on the range. The notes drifted over the wire and into the dark rice paddies, where fireflies blinked like the ghosts of fallen comrades. Evans lay awake, staring at the stars through the roof slats. He could hear the guards laughing near the gate, the clink of their sake bottles. Somewhere in the distance, artillery thundered faintly, the front, perhaps 20 or 30 miles away. He turned to the man beside him and whispered, "You hear that?" The other prisoner nodded. "Maybe the Yanks are coming." Evans said nothing more. In Cabanatuan, hope was both a necessity and a danger. It kept a man alive, but it could just as easily kill him. Still, as he drifted toward uneasy sleep, Evans allowed himself one forbidden thought: if they're close enough for us to hear, maybe someone out there remembers we're still here. Outside, the guards changed shifts. The tower lights swept over the huts, catching the outlines of 513 men who had learned to dream in silence. U.S. 6th Army Headquarters, San Fabian, Luzon, January 1945. The war in Luzon was a map of uncertainties, roads without bridges, rivers without names, and prisoners whose existence hung on rumor. When General Walter Kruger's 6th Army landed in the Lingayen Gulf in early January, one of its first intelligence priorities was human, not territorial: find the POWs before the Japanese kill them. The order was terse, hand-signed, and sent through channels marked urgent and confidential. It landed on the desk of Colonel Horton White, G2 intelligence chief, who read it twice, then passed it to his aide. "We may be too late," he muttered. The Japanese had already executed American prisoners at Puerto Princesa just weeks earlier, machine-gunned and burned alive in their trenches. If the same fate awaited those held inland, time itself was the enemy. Reconnaissance photographs had shown faint outlines of compounds near Cabanatuan, some 70 miles behind enemy lines. Communications intercepts confirmed light Japanese movement near Nueva Ecija. But photos were one thing, proof of life another. For that, Kruger needed eyes on the ground. Enter the Alamo Scouts. They were small, invisible, and trusted, hand-picked men from the 6th Army's Reconnaissance Detachment, trained for stealth and endurance. On January 24, 2 6-man teams slipped beyond the American front lines disguised as Filipino rice traders. They carried minimal arms, no insignia, and instructions to see, not fight. For 3 days they moved through the paddies, wading through waist-deep water by night and hiding under bamboo during the day. The first contact came near a village south of Platero, where they met a band of Filipino guerrillas led by Captain Juan Pajota, a wiry, sharp-eyed former Philippine Army officer whose men had fought the Japanese since 1942. Pajota's network stretched across Luzon, a web of messengers, farmers, and spies who traded intelligence for ammunition. The scouts were skeptical at first, but Pajota led them up a low hill overlooking the valley. Through field glasses, they saw it: Cabanatuan Prison Camp No. 1, fenced in barbed wire, guard towers on each corner, and rows of low nipa huts sagging under the sun. Japanese sentries patrolled lazily between the huts, rifles slung over shoulders. Inside, small figures in ragged clothes moved with mechanical slowness. One scout, Sergeant Harold Stivers, whispered, "They're still alive." They stayed for hours, charting every detail: the guard shifts, the gates, the distance to the nearest road. Pajota's men noted the locations of Japanese outposts to the north and east. The camp held over 500 prisoners, guarded by roughly 200 Japanese troops, with reinforcements within a few miles. That night, under the dim light of a kerosene lantern, the scouts sent their report back by runner: Cabanatuan confirmed occupied. POW strength estimated 500. Heavily guarded. Local guerrillas available for coordination. When the message reached 6th Army headquarters 2 days later, Kruger convened an emergency conference. The air was thick with tension and cigarette smoke. "If the Japanese know we're coming," one colonel warned, "they'll execute every man in that camp." Kruger's response was measured. "Then we don't announce we're coming." He looked to his operations officer. "Who do we have capable of getting in and out 30 miles behind the lines?" The answer came immediately: the 6th Ranger Battalion. Under Lieutenant Colonel Henry Mucci, the Rangers had earned a reputation for aggression and precision. They were trained to move fast, fight light, and vanish before dawn. When the call came, Mucci accepted without hesitation. "If there's a chance, we'll take it," he said. "We won't let another Palawan happen." That evening, Mucci met the returning Alamo Scouts in a palm grove outside Gimba. They spread a hand-drawn map across an ammunition crate: roads, creeks, enemy outposts, the camp itself. Pajota stood beside them, tracing routes with his finger. "The Japanese patrols come every afternoon along this road," he said. "You must cross at night. If you're seen, you die, and so do the prisoners." Mucci nodded. "Then we move by darkness only." The plan began to take form: a night infiltration of 121 Rangers, guided by guerrillas, to assault the camp in one coordinated strike. No artillery, no vehicles, no fallback option. Every man would carry only what he could run with. As the meeting broke up, one of the scouts looked back toward the east, where the faint glow of Japanese campfires shimmered on the horizon. "Those men in there," he said quietly, "they've been waiting 3 years. Let's not make them wait another week." In that moment, the decision was final. Intelligence had found the prisoners. Now the burden shifted to courage. The hunters would become the saviors, and the silence around Cabanatuan was about to break. Gimba, Luzon, January 28, 1945. The night air around Gimba was thick with humidity and the metallic scent of oil and sweat. In a cluster of abandoned huts, 121 men of the 6th Ranger Battalion waited for orders that none would forget. Their commander, Lieutenant Colonel Henry A. Mucci, walked the dirt floor with quiet intensity, a folded map in one hand and a cigar clenched between his teeth. Mucci was 40, compact and sharp-eyed, the kind of officer who could project calm even when every nerve screamed otherwise. He had been ordered to assemble a strike force capable of penetrating 30 miles behind Japanese lines, liberating hundreds of prisoners, and escaping intact. "This isn't a raid," he told his men earlier that day. "It's a promise, to the men who never stopped believing we'd come." The Rangers were volunteers in all but name, hard, lean soldiers who had fought across New Guinea and Leyte. Most were veterans of long patrols and ambushes, familiar with exhaustion, malaria, and silence. Captain Robert Prince, Mucci's operations officer, had the unenviable job of turning intelligence sketches into a workable assault plan. He spread a crude map over a crate and began his briefing. "The camp is here, 2 miles east of the Cabanatuan River. Guards rotate every 2 hours. Main gate faces west. We'll move in from the north, across open rice paddies. Pajota's guerrillas will block the road at the Cebu Bridge to stop reinforcements from Cabanatuan town. Alamo scouts will guide us to the approach point." A murmur passed through the men. Crossing open paddies under moonlight meant exposure, no cover, no second chance. Prince didn't sugarcoat it. "We'll use the moon. It's full enough to see, but dark enough to hide. Move fast, stay low, and if you hear gunfire before we reach the wire, you run toward it, not away." The Rangers began checking weapons: M1 Garrisons, carbines, Browning automatics, and the stubby M101 Thompson submachine guns many still called Chicago typewriters. Ammunition was stripped down to essentials. No one carried more than 80 rounds, 2 grenades, and 1 C-ration meal. Every ounce of weight meant 1 more mile they could cover before dawn. Mucci walked among them as they prepared. "You'll be outnumbered," he said. "But you'll have surprise, speed, and the knowledge that what you're doing matters more than your lives." He paused, letting the words settle. "I don't expect a man here to come back the same. But I do expect every prisoner in that camp to come back with you." Just before sundown, the Filipino guerrillas arrived, over 200 fighters under Captains Juan Pajota and Eduardo Joson. They wore mismatched uniforms, carried everything from Enfields to old Springfield rifles, and moved with the wary confidence of men who had survived occupation for 3 years. Pajota greeted Mucci with a crisp salute and a smile. "We know these fields like we know our blood," he said. "You will not walk alone tonight." At dusk, final orders were read. Mucci divided his force. 1 platoon under Prince would assault the main gate, another would hit the rearguard towers. Blocking teams would set up ambush points along the roads, while guerrillas cut phone lines and intercepted Japanese couriers. Each man memorized his position by compass bearing and the shape of the terrain. Then came a brief silence, the kind that falls when men realize talk has reached its limit. Sergeant Ted Richardson, a 19-year-old from Iowa, looked at the horizon where the last light bled out of the palms. 30 miles in, he whispered to his friend. "Feels like we're walking into the middle of Japan." His friend nodded. "Yeah, but they won't see us coming." Mucci gave the final signal. "We move at twilight. No fires, no talking, no lights. If you're separated, head east. The scouts will find you." As darkness descended, the column assembled, Rangers, scouts, and guerrillas slipping into single file along the narrow trail. Behind them, the sound of engines faded. Ahead, only the jungle breathed. Prince glanced back once, seeing the faint glimmer of friendly lines vanish into black. Then he faced forward, rifle ready. Somewhere ahead lay a camp full of starving men who had stopped counting days. Tonight, the Rangers would start theirs again, with 1 step, 1 mile, and 1 chance to make history. Night of January 28, 1945, Luzon, the march to Cabanatuan. The Rangers left Gimba under a moon that hung like a dull coin in the mist. At precisely 1,700 hours, Mucci gave the signal. The column, 121 Rangers, 2 Alamo scout teams, and guides from Captain Pajota's guerrillas, slipped into the tall grass south of the road and vanished. No engines, no lights, no talking. The only sounds were the dull slap of bare boots in mud and the rhythmic chirp of night insects. The men carried everything they would need, and nothing they could not. Each ranger had his rifle, a handful of magazines, canteen, and rations crammed into a musette bag. Even their helmets had been stripped of shine with mud. The mission depended on invisibility. "The moon's our enemy tonight," whispered Captain Robert Prince. By midnight, the column had covered nearly 10 miles, moving through rice paddies glistening like mirrors. The air was heavy and wet, turning every breath into work. At intervals, Pajota's guerrillas halted the column with a hand signal. Somewhere ahead, a Japanese patrol had stopped to smoke. The men froze. Mucci crouched low, watching the faint glow of cigarettes through the grass. A few Japanese soldiers laughed quietly, their rifles slung, oblivious. The column waited motionless for nearly 20 minutes until the laughter drifted away down the road. When the signal came, they resumed the march, slower now, 1 heartbeat at a time. Crossing the Pampanga River was next. The current was sluggish but wide, and the banks were slick with algae. The men waded through chest-deep water, rifles held overhead. Somewhere downstream, a carabao grunted. Sergeant Ted Richardson slipped and vanished beneath the surface before surfacing, sputtering. "Keep quiet," hissed his sergeant. Even a single splash could give them away. By 0200, they reached the barrio of Balancaran, where guerrilla scouts awaited. There, Pajota conferred briefly with Mucci. "Japanese troops bivouacked 2 kilometers ahead," he said in a low voice. Truck column passed earlier, heading east. Mucci studied his wristwatch, then nodded. "We'll bypass to the south. No contact unless fired upon." The detour cost them precious hours. Through the night they crawled along narrow dikes, their silhouettes blending into the reeds. The moonlight exposed them to anyone watching from the camp road. Captain Prince later wrote that it was the longest half-mile of my life, every second an invitation to be shot. At dawn, the column reached the edge of a tree line overlooking the Cabanatuan Valley. Below them, a sea of rice paddies stretched toward the horizon, and beyond that, a faint line of wooden huts glowed in the first light, the camp. The men collapsed into the grass, soaked in sweat and river water. For the first time, they allowed themselves to rest. Rangers took turns eating from tin cans, their fingers shaking from fatigue. Guerrilla scouts posted sentries and observed the road. They saw small convoys of Japanese trucks, likely retreating elements from the north, rumbling westward. At 0600, the Alamo scouts returned from reconnaissance of the perimeter. Their report was grim but clear. 200 guards, said Sergeant Stivers. Machine guns on the towers. About 75 more soldiers in the garrison to the north. But we saw them, our men. They're alive. The camp was surrounded by open ground, no cover for an assault. The Rangers would have to crawl nearly half a mile across bare paddies under enemy watch. Prince traced the approach path in the dirt with a stick. "Here," he said, pointing to a dry irrigation ditch. "We move from there at dusk. Pajota will cut the bridge and block reinforcements." Mucci nodded, already thinking ahead. "We hit them tomorrow night. Every hour we wait risks discovery." The men spent the day hidden under palms and tall cogon grass, sleeping in turns. They cleaned their weapons, checked ammunition, and listened to the hum of distant planes. Occasionally, a Japanese column passed within earshot, boots crunching gravel, engines sputtering. None noticed the silent watchers lying a few yards away. As the sun fell, the men rose again, stiff and hollow-eyed. A full day's march behind them, the camp within reach, and every instinct screaming that they were deep inside enemy country. Mucci whispered as he adjusted his pack, "Next time we stop, it'll be inside those fences." Then, as the first stars flickered over Luzon, the Rangers moved out once more, ghosts in the grass, threading through the darkness toward the prisoners who still waited for salvation they no longer believed would come. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. January 30th, 1945, approaching Cabanatuan prison camp. The Rangers reached the final staging ground at dusk, a narrow irrigation ditch lined with reeds and mud, barely deep enough to hide a man. Beyond it stretched open rice paddies, pale under the waxing moon, and at their far edge loomed the fence of Cabanatuan prison camp. Between the Rangers and the wire lay nearly 500 yards of emptiness. Lieutenant Colonel Mucci lay flat in the mud, scanning the horizon through binoculars. Guard towers rose like dark crucifixes against the sky. Through the lenses he could see silhouettes moving, Japanese sentries on lazy patrol, rifles slung, unaware that an American battalion crouched just beyond the fields. He passed the glasses to Captain Robert Prince, who confirmed what they both already knew: there would be no element of surprise if even one guard turned his head at the wrong moment. "Too bright," whispered Prince. "The moon's coming up fast." Mucci exhaled slowly. "We wait for the diversion." 2 miles to the west, the droning hum of engines began to echo faintly, the P-61 Black Widow, flown by Major Ken Schreiber of the 547th Night Fighter Squadron. Its mission was unorthodox, to draw every pair of Japanese eyes skyward. The twin-engine aircraft dipped low over the camp, feigning engine trouble, then looped lazily in the distance with navigation lights blinking. The guards pointed and shouted, their rifles waving toward the heavens. That was the signal. Prince glanced at his watch, 1945 hours, and gave the silent order. The Rangers began to crawl forward. 121 men, face down in the mud, inching across the paddies like shadows. Every movement was deliberate. Their packs dragged grooves through the waterlogged earth, their weapons pressed cold against their chests. For 20 minutes, they moved in total silence. A frog croaked nearby. Somewhere in the huts, a dog barked once, then stopped, perhaps silenced by one of Pajota's guerrillas who had slipped ahead to cut the camp's alarm lines. Behind them, Pajota's blocking force took position near the Cebu Bridge. He had rigged the approaches with explosives and lined his men along the road, waiting for any Japanese convoy that might respond. Guerrilla scouts reported 2 truckloads of enemy soldiers less than 2 miles away. "They will come," Pajota whispered. "But they will not pass." At the wire, Sergeant Ted Richardson and his squad crawled to the gate. Using wire cutters muffled with cloth, they began slicing through the first fence. The sound was almost inaudible, but every click felt thunderous in the still night. Beyond the inner fence, the low murmur of Japanese voices drifted from a guardhouse. Prince raised his arm, signaling the assault teams into position. 2 Browning automatic riflemen trained on the nearest towers. Mucci's voice came in a whisper barely louder than breathing, "Hold until I fire." The first burst of gunfire broke the stillness like lightning. The Rangers opened up simultaneously, short, precise volleys. The nearest guard tower erupted in sparks as the machine gunner toppled backward. A flare burst above the camp, white light washing over the huts. "Go! Go! Go!" Prince shouted. The Rangers surged through the gap, firing as they ran. The Japanese guards reeled, scrambling for their rifles. A grenade exploded near the main gate, shredding the alarm bell before it could sound. Within seconds, the assault teams fanned out through the camp, clearing the barracks row by row. Inside the huts, gaunt men blinked awake in terror. Some thought they were dreaming, others thought the Japanese had come to finish them. "We're Americans," shouted Sergeant O'Malley, kicking open a door. "Get up. You're going home." Disoriented prisoners stumbled into the moonlight, clutching at rescuers who seemed unreal. One POW, skeletal and barefoot, fell to his knees, weeping. "We thought you forgot us," he said. Mucci ran through the chaos, directing his men toward the infirmary. "Gather them fast, every man who can walk, move. The wounded, get to the carts." Gunfire crackled at the camp's perimeter as Japanese soldiers attempted to regroup. Outside the walls, the blocking forces opened up. Guerrillas on the POW bridge unleashed a storm of rifle fire and grenades, halting the first Japanese counterattack cold. Flames lit the night sky as a truck exploded. Pajota shouted orders over the roar of gunfire, his men holding their line with deadly precision. Back inside, Captain Prince gave the final signal, 3 sharp whistles. "We're out. Move them." In less than 30 minutes, the impossible had happened. The prisoners of Cabanatuan, men who had endured Bataan, starvation, and years of despair, were free. As the column began its retreat into the darkness, Mucci looked back once at the burning camp. "No second chances," he whispered. "Now let's get them home." January 30th to 31st, 1945, the escape from Cabanatuan. The night swallowed them whole. 121 Rangers, 513 liberated prisoners, and more than 200 Filipino guerrillas began their retreat through the rice paddies, moving west toward the Pampanga River. The moonlight that had nearly betrayed them during the assault now illuminated their escape. Each step was agony for the prisoners, barefoot, starved, many too weak to walk, but the Rangers carried them, supported them, or pulled them on improvised carts fashioned from bamboo and rope. The sound of distant gunfire echoed behind them, the last volleys from Pajota's men at the POW bridge. The Japanese were coming. Scouts reported trucks full of soldiers heading from Cabanatuan town, their headlights sweeping through the darkness. Pajota's blocking force detonated explosives on the bridge, sending the lead vehicle into flames and halting pursuit. "Hold them until dawn," he ordered, reloading his carbine. For hours, the guerrillas fought from ditches and tree lines, their silhouettes vanishing with each muzzle flash. Meanwhile, the main column trudged through waist-deep water, every ranger hyper-aware of the weight on his back, sometimes a rifle, sometimes a man. Captain Prince moved among the prisoners, urging them forward. "You've made it this far," he said to a collapsing corporal from the 31st Infantry. "One more mile, and you'll never see a Jap again." Many didn't answer. Exhaustion was total. The rescued men had lived on 700 calories a day for nearly 3 years, now they were being marched through swamps on the edge of collapse. Lieutenant O'Malley improvised a stretcher from bamboo poles and a blanket, dragging a delirious prisoner whose legs were ulcerated to the bone. "Keep your head up," he told him. "You're free now. Don't die free." By 2300 hours, they reached the edge of Balangcaran village, where Major Lapham's guerrillas had prepared a rest point. Fires were forbidden, only water, coconuts, and quiet encouragement. The villagers, risking execution, emerged from their huts carrying rice balls and bananas. "Para Samga Americano," one woman whispered, "for the Americans." Mucci ordered a 20-minute halt. He checked his watch, the operation was still within schedule. Overhead, the drone of the P-61 Black Widow returned, circling, unseen, to signal that aerial observation continued. It was 2330. The Japanese had not yet broken through the guerrilla cordon. At midnight, the march resumed. The terrain changed from flat paddies to brush-covered ridges. The column stretched for nearly a mile, an unbroken snake of shadows. Rangers at the front hacked through the undergrowth with machetes, clearing a path toward Platero, where carabao carts waited. Behind them, a prisoner stumbled into a ditch and cried out in pain. Sergeant Richardson hauled him up, slung his arm over his shoulder, and whispered, "If I can't carry you, I'll drag you." By 0200 hours, rain began to fall, masking their noise but turning the trails into rivers of mud. The Rangers pressed on. For every man who fell, 2 others took his weight. "No one left behind," Prince repeated like a mantra. The line moved with grim determination. Near Platero, they met the carts, dozens of them, creaking wooden wagons drawn by water buffalo. Filipino civilians guided them, silent and steady. The weakest prisoners were loaded first, their hollow eyes watching the jungle roll past. Rangers pushed alongside, hands on the wheels to keep them from tipping in the ruts. At 0330, Pajota's radio man caught up with the column. Bridge secure. Enemy stopped, he reported between breaths. Pajota and his men had held the line through the night, killing more than 200 Japanese while suffering minimal losses. The Rangers exhaled in relief, the route west remained open. As dawn broke over the Sierra Madre foothills, they crossed the Pampanga River. The first light of January 31st turned the muddy water gold. Exhausted men wept openly as they reached the far bank. For the first time in nearly 3 years, the prisoners could see an American flag, stitched crudely by guerrillas and raised above the far shore. A cheer rose, weak, disbelieving, but real. One former POW whispered, "We're home." But Mucci didn't allow celebration. "Not yet," he said. "We're still in enemy territory." They marched again, west toward the village of Talavera, where trucks from the 6th Army waited. As the sun climbed higher, they saw them, olive-drab vehicles lined along a dirt road, engines idling. Rangers hoisted the weakest men aboard, others climbing in after them. Some prisoners touched the steel frames in awe, as if they were sacred objects. At 0730 hours, the first trucks rolled out, bound for American lines at Gimba. The road home stretched before them, guarded by Filipino partisans and patrolled by Allied aircraft. Behind them, Cabanatuan burned. Mucci watched from the last truck, his uniform caked in mud, his eyes heavy with fatigue. He turned once more to Prince. "We got them all," he said softly. Prince nodded. "Every last one." The convoy rumbled west, carrying 513 men who had escaped death, and 121 Rangers who had walked through it to bring them back. February 1st to 5th, 1945, the return to freedom. The trucks rattled across the central Luzon plain under a rising sun. Dust rose in great clouds behind the convoy as it moved toward the safety of Gimba, where the forward elements of the U.S. 6th Army waited. Every jolt sent a groan through the men in the back, emaciated prisoners whose bodies had forgotten what motion felt like. But their eyes were alive. They watched the horizon with disbelief, as though afraid the world might vanish before they reached it. At the lead truck, Lieutenant Colonel Mucci sat beside Captain Prince, both silent, both half-dazed by exhaustion. Behind them rode the men they had come for, soldiers who had survived Bataan, the Death March, and nearly 3 years of captivity. Now, at last, they were heading home. The first sign of friendly lines came at mid-morning, a dirt checkpoint manned by troops of the 37th Infantry Division. The sentries, startled by the unexpected convoy, raised their rifles until Mucci waved a blood-stained arm. "Rangers," he shouted. "With rescued POWs." The guard froze, then saluted. Word spread like fire down the line. Soldiers dropped their weapons and ran toward the trucks, shouting, weeping, pressing canteens and chocolate bars into the hands of the rescued. Some of the prisoners wept uncontrollably, clutching the wrappers as if they were gold. Captain Prince stepped down from his vehicle and leaned against the fender, too tired to stand straight. "We made it," he said quietly, and for the first time in 2 days, allowed himself to believe it. Army medics swarmed the trucks, lifting out the weakest men. Many were skeletal, barely 90 pounds, their uniforms hanging like rags. They were carried to makeshift medical tents, where cots had been prepared in neat rows. Doctors moved from one to another, checking pulse, temperature, and wounds. Some men could not speak at all. At Gimba, General Walter Kruger, commander of the 6th Army, arrived to meet the column. His jeep pulled up beside the lead truck, where Mucci waited. Kruger removed his cap, shook Mucci's hand, and said simply, "You brought them back." "All of them." Mucci nodded, his face streaked with grime. "Yes, sir. Every man." The general turned to the trucks, his voice heavy. "The whole army will hear of this." News traveled faster than any convoy. By that afternoon, radio networks from Leyte to San Francisco were transmitting the first reports. American Rangers rescue 513 prisoners from Japanese camp at Cabanatuan. The story ignited morale across the Pacific. For thousands of men still fighting on Luzon, it was proof that no one had been forgotten. At the field hospital, the liberated prisoners began to eat again, slowly, cautiously. Army nurses, flown in from Lingayen, watched over them. Small bites, one nurse told a gaunt lieutenant who had not tasted meat in 2 years. "You've got to teach your stomach again." In another tent, a doctor examined a prisoner whose dog tags identified him as Sergeant John Cook. "You're lucky, son," the doctor said. Cook managed a faint grin. "Luck had nothing to do with it, document." The Rangers came. That night, the camp was quiet except for the sound of rain on canvas and the hum of generators. The Rangers, too, slept for the first time in days, boots still on, rifles at their sides. Captain Prince wrote a single line in his notebook before drifting off, all accounted for. Mission complete. The next morning, the rescued men began giving statements to intelligence officers. They described years of starvation, beatings, and forced labor at Camp O'Donnell and Cabanatuan. Their testimonies filled pages, evidence of war crimes that would later echo at Tokyo. On February 3, the first air transports arrived to carry the weakest men to field hospitals in Leyte and later to the United States. As they were lifted onto stretchers and loaded aboard, some reached for the hands of the Rangers who had freed them. "Don't forget us," one whispered. Prince squeezed the man's hand. "Never." That evening, Mucci and Prince met privately with General Kruger. The general congratulated them but spoke gravely. "You know what you've done," he said. "This wasn't just a rescue, it was a promise kept. The men on Bataan were never abandoned." Mucci nodded, his eyes distant. "We just brought them home, sir." 2 days later, the Rangers were ordered back to their lines near Gimba. As they prepared to move out, dozens of the rescued gathered by the road, some still too weak to stand without support. They raised their hands in salute as the Rangers passed. One voice called out, hoarse but steady, "Thank you." The Rangers didn't answer. They just nodded, helmets low, boots sinking in the mud. Behind them, the rescued men watched until the last truck disappeared over the ridge, until the dust settled and only silence remained. They had come 30 miles through enemy lines, fought against impossible odds, and carried 513 men from the shadow of death. The operation was over. But for every Ranger and every prisoner who walked out of Cabanatuan, the memory of that night would never fade. It had become more than a mission, it was redemption written in blood and courage across the dark heart of Luzon. February 1945, Aftermath and Legacy. The liberation of Cabanatuan spread across the Pacific like a shockwave. Newspapers in Honolulu, San Francisco, and New York carried the same headline on February 2, 1945, Rangers rescue 513 POWs in daring raid behind enemy lines. For the American public, weary after years of grim reports from the Pacific, it was a story of hope, proof that courage and loyalty still mattered in a war of attrition. In the Philippines, the news reached General Douglas MacArthur as his forces pressed toward Manila. He summoned his aides and read the after-action summary twice, in silence. "A brilliant execution," he finally said. "Those men have redeemed the pledge I made on Corregidor." The next day, he sent a personal message to Colonel Mucci and Captain Prince, "You have accomplished one of the most daring and successful rescues in the annals of military history." For the Rangers themselves, the praise felt hollow. They had completed the mission, but the faces of those who didn't return from the rice paddies haunted them. A handful of guerrillas, including Captain Pajota's men, had fallen during the blocking action at Cebu Bridge. Their names would never appear in American newspapers. "They fought like brothers," Prince later wrote, "and most of them never saw the freedom they helped deliver." At Gimba, a formal ceremony was held. General Kruger pinned Distinguished Service Crosses on Mucci and Prince, while every man in the 6th Ranger Battalion received the Presidential Unit Citation. Reporters crowded the field, snapping photographs of gaunt survivors shaking hands with their rescuers. One photo captured a moment between a liberated private and a ranger sergeant, both thin, both smiling faintly, the background filled with wrecked trucks and jungle haze. The image would circulate for decades, symbolizing sacrifice and salvation. Meanwhile, the former prisoners began their long journey home. From Leyte, they were flown to Guam, then to Hawaii, and finally to the continental United States. Many were too weak to walk unaided. At Hickam Field, nurses lined the tarmac with wheelchairs and blankets. When one man stepped off the transport unaided, the crowd of medics broke into spontaneous applause. He saluted, tears streaming down his face. In letters and interviews, the rescued men tried to describe what it meant. Lieutenant William Dias, who had survived both Bataan and Cabanatuan, wrote, "They didn't just free us from the camp, they pulled us out of hell itself." Others spoke of the strange silence in the days after liberation, the absence of guards, the first taste of freedom feeling unreal. For the Japanese command, the raid was a humiliation. Tokyo radio made no mention of it, but intercepted transmissions revealed fury within the 14th Area Army. Garrison commanders were reprimanded. New orders were issued to immediately execute all prisoners if an Allied force approached. Ironically, this reinforced the urgency of future rescues. The Cabanatuan raid had saved lives beyond those 513, it forced Allied planners to accelerate operations at Santo Tomas and Los Baños before the Japanese could retaliate. In the months that followed, Manila was liberated, and the war in the Philippines turned irrevocably against Japan. Colonel Mucci never saw the end of it. In August 1945, before Japan's surrender, he was reassigned stateside for promotion. He declined a desk job and retired shortly after the war. He died in 1951, never seeking fame. Prince, who led the assault, continued his service quietly, teaching at West Point and later returning to civilian life. When asked about the raid, he said simply, "It was the men beside me who made it happen. I just pointed the way." In 1962, during a U.S.-Japan Aviation History Symposium in Tokyo, former Japanese officers acknowledged the Cabanatuan raid as a masterwork of coordination, intelligence, and moral conviction. Decades later, at the 1985 Pacific Theater Veterans Reunion in Hawaii, surviving Rangers and former POWs gathered again. Old men now, they embraced under banners that read Cabanatuan, never forgotten. One of the survivors, now frail and stooped, took the stage. His voice trembled as he spoke. "They told us no one was coming. But they came anyway. They came for us." The hall fell silent. Outside, the ocean stretched blue and endless under the Pacific sun, the same sea that had witnessed their suffering and salvation. The men stood together, the memory of that January night still etched in every heartbeat. The raid on Cabanatuan would enter history as more than a daring rescue, it was a promise fulfilled between soldiers, a testament that even in the darkest corners of war, humanity endured. In the end, the numbers told only part of the story: 121 Rangers, 200 guerrillas, 513 prisoners freed. But what could not be measured was the echo it left behind, a quiet vow carried across generations: no man left behind.